Hi, my name is Deanne Barr, and I write novels of sex, suspense, and satire. My latest, Saving Grace, a psychological thriller, is currently available on pre order at Amazon and other fine book distributors. What's it about? Well, Grace Rendell couldn't write a book to save her life until she had to, and I'll leave it at that. My guest today on Author Groupie is John F. Dobbyn, a former lawyer and law professor who virtually stumbled into his current career as a best-selling author. With 22 published short stories and 6 novels to his credit. He'll talk about that journey and how it's led to a production company currently working to film his work. So sit back, enjoy, and as always, stay safe. Welcome to another edition of Author Groupie. I'm here with best-selling author John F. Dobbyn, who is a graduate of Harvard College, Boston College Law School, and Harvard Law School. And he is a former professor of law at Villanova Law School, where he taught criminal, constitutional, and corporate law for 47 years. Prior to his teaching career, Dobbyn practiced criminal and civil trial work. He is a frequent contributor to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, having sold 22 short stories. Actually, that might be more, I think, because you just had one come out. And he is the author of 5 award-winning legal thrillers featuring Boston criminal trial attorneys Michael Knight and Lex Devlin. The first novel, Neon Dragon, was dealing with the Chinese Tong in Boston's Chinatown and was published by Ocean View Publishing, who have published the rest of the series. Subsequent novels have included Frame Up, about the international art theft world and forgery. Black Diamond, about horse racing, Deadly Diamonds, about blood diamonds of Sierra Leone, and Fatal Odds, about the illicit international trade in endangered species of wild animals. The latest is High Stakes, which we'll be talking about. It's out now, and he's also, as I said, just had a story published in Alfred Hitchcock. He is a Boston native who now resides in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, with his wife Lois. So one other piece of big news, according to your website, Neon Dragon is now being made into a film, and shooting starts shortly. So congratulations and welcome to Author Groupie.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Was all that accurate?
Absolutely. I recognized myself when you were saying it, as a matter of fact. You did a good job on it.
Oh, thank you. Well, as a law professor, you've written extensively in the law field. What caused you to make the shift to mystery and thriller fiction?
That's a very good question. It's funny. I'm sure you're an author too, and I know you know lots of other authors. Being on the board of MWA and so on, you meet a lot of authors, and most of them that Lois and I used to go up to the meetings in New York of Mystery Writers of America, and met a lot of authors there, and almost all of them that we met would say, when did you first know you wanted to be a writer? Oh, when I was 3 years old. It's all I've ever wanted to do for my entire life. And I could not identify with any of those people. Anything that involved writing, I would avoid like the plague.
Really?
Until I went into teaching the same year. Lois and I married. I left the law firm, went into teaching. And there were a lot of changes. We moved down here to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And the strangest thing happened. Lois got acquainted with a number of the ladies in the area, and they were all into tennis. So Lois wanted to take tennis lessons. And since the only tennis lessons available were at the mainline night school, that meant she was going to be out at night taking these lessons. So I wanted to go with her and be with her at the time. But what am I going to do while she's, banging a tennis ball around? So I looked over the program, and the only thing of remote interest in the curriculum was a course in fiction writing. Why not? So I signed up for it, and I really was not taking the course too seriously, but it was taught by a wonderful woman, a grand woman. Jean Hortenberg is her name, and Jean was an award-winning writer of children's stories. Anyway, Jean gave us an assignment, and the assignment was to write 5 paragraphs on the 5 senses. A walk in the woods, you smell the trees, you hear the birds, So that sounded reasonably boring. So I thought, I'm not taking this too seriously anyway. You know what would be more fun than that? Suppose that I were to put together a short mystery story. And suppose that I made the detective a blind criminology professor, so that he'd have to depend heavily on the other 4 senses in order to solve the crime. And it became sort of a challenge, so I gave it a shot, and I handed it in. And it sort of reminded me of my own students, because frequently when I would ask a student a question, if the student didn't know the answer to that question, he'd answer a question of his choice and hope I didn't notice the difference. And I was doing the same thing. So she read it, and son of a gun, a wonderful, sweet woman that she was, she said that she liked it, and she even advised that I send it to a magazine. Really, Jean, how do you do that? So she gave me the format and so on, and I sent it to Mike Shane's Mystery Magazine. And this is where God interceded. Lightning struck, believe it or not. First time out of the box, they bought it. They bought it and they published it. And it was complete fluke. I had no idea what I was doing. I really did not know how to do it. But for some reason or other, they picked it up, they published it, and I've got to admit, they went out of business a year later. I hope there's no connection. But anyway. But I was hooked, and you know what that feeling is, because I'm sure you've had your first acceptance, right?
Yes.
And you can't turn back. Then it's in the blood, you know.
Yeah.
And so then I really started writing short stories in earnest. And I got to tell you, I received rejection letters from everything that published. I was sending them. I sent it to everything but the phone book. And I got the feeling that I was developing a phenomenon which was called instantaneous rejection. I had a feel, those are the days when you drop the manuscript in the mailbox. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that, but I had a feeling when I would drop my next short story into the mailbox, somewhere in the world there was somebody dropping a rejection slip for that. At exactly the same, and they'd cross in the, but anyway. I collected enough rejection slips in the next 6 years to paper our house.
Wow.
And you know what kept me going? My wife Lois. And she had a brilliant tactic for doing it. Every time that I'd go out, I'd mail the manuscript. As soon as I came home, she'd say, now start writing the next one. And it was brilliant, because you know what would happen? I'd be half through writing it by the time I get that rejection, and I'd figure, oh, I might as well finish this story anyway. You know, and so it kept me rolling for 6 years. Anyway, Finally came the day. I was sending some of them to Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, which, as you know, has the label "World's Leading Mystery Magazine," right? And it is. I mean, everybody agrees that it's probably the premier mystery magazine. Son of a gun! I sent off my short story. I got yet another rejection slip, but God love her. There was an editor-in-chief, Eleanor Sullivan was her name. I love her to pieces, because I got back the rejection slip, but she had handwritten in the margin, "Don't quit, you're getting close."
Oh, wow.
She actually noticed. Can you believe it? So anyway, then I really put some time into the next one. She bought the next one, and then she bought the next 22 short stories. But as you know, there's almost a glass ceiling. Don, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's almost a glass ceiling. There is the group, and they never make you feel this way, but there is the group who have written nothing but short stories. And then there is the group who have broken through and they have written a novel and had it published, you know? And I always felt as if until I break through that ceiling, I'm not really a writer. So I decided, like, well, I'll give it a shot. So that was when I wrote that first novel, which was Neon Dragon. And as you mentioned, I tried it on a number of different publishers. I even had an agent at that time. In fact, I had 2 agents, one after the other, and each one of them tried everything they could to sell it, but it went nowhere. So anyway, that was when I saw an ad, not an ad, but I just saw a mention of Ocean View Publishing in Writer Magazine. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, hey, why not? And Ocean View was just starting at that time. This must have been, oh golly, what, 25, 30 years ago. And they were just starting. And I sent it to them, and they read it. The editor there is Pat Gusson, her husband. Bob Gusson owns the publishing house. And boy, they have grown in leaps and bounds. They are really, a major outfit now. But they bought the first one, and I'm rambling on. Stop me.
No, that's fine. I think
so
that
one thought leads to another.
It's a great house. And I love their covers. House. Yeah.
And she's a superb editor. I mean, she will, and they've published all 6 novels now, and and they're encouraging me on the 7th. But she has an eye, Dawn. that I've never known in an editor before. She can say, gee, in the first paragraph, you said that this particular character had red hair or was named such and such. Gee, on page 352, it's brown hair, and
oh, wow, that's great.
Oh yeah, it's a talent. It's
yeah.
But I remember when she sent the acceptance for that first novel, Neon Dragon, and what she said, I'll never forget the words. She said, "If I will accept this, we will accept it, and we will publish it, if you can cut 10,000 words." Can you 10,000? Which 10,000? Shall we eliminate every other word? How are we going to do it? So Lois and I spent that weekend, and we went over it page by line, and some of the lines that were so dear to my heart. Oh my gosh, I love that line. And snip, and there it goes onto the floor, And we did that for 10,000 words, and she bought it and published it, and we've been with them ever since.
You don't find publishers who will sit down and edit with you, so that's amazing.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing they've done is every contract is a 2-book contract, in that they'll buy this book, but they have the first rights to the next book, which is not even in my head yet. So they've been wonderful. And yet, other friends of mine, Neil Albert, who published a series of 6 novels, The April Corpse, The January something or other, Frozen January, and so on. Whenever he'd send in a book, send in one in, and they'd accept it, you get 6 months deadline for the next one. And Pat and Bob have never, they said, hey, when you're ready, make it as good as you can make it. And when you're ready, send it to us.
That sounds perfect.
That's a blessing.
Yeah, it sounds great. Let me ask you, your leading character in the Michael Knight Lex Devlin series, each story is in the first person, and Michael is very closely aligned with his law partner, Lex Devlin. Are either Michael Knight or Lex Devlin based on real people in your life?
That's a very good question. Yes and no. Or I should say no and yes. It's funny. I can remember the exact moment. I was driving down Route 202, which is close to Valley Forge here. I can remember that day, and it was when I was just beginning to work on that first novel, and I thought, gee, I got to have a leading character. I had always wanted to do it in the first person. And the reason is it seems so much more personal. In other words, if the reader is reading, not that, Sam Spade did such and such, and Sam Spade thought this, and Sam Bates, that somebody else, it's divorced. But if the reader is reading, I felt this way, and I was up against this, and the thoughts that are going through my mind, it interiorizes it, if there is such a word. And they connect, I think, more easily with the novel. So I always wanted it in the first person. So on that ride, I structured Michael Knight. And he's not a real person. I threw in elements. For example, I thought the day may come when I will want to deal in the Puerto Rican community or one of the Latino communities. I think I'll make him, binational. Make his mother Puerto Rican, his father Irish. And boy, it's funny. Some of the things that I did in those days later on in future books, thank God I did, because boy, I've been using it. But Lex Devlin is a real person. Lex Devlin, in fact, he's the only real person I've ever used. And he is completely my Uncle Dick. My Uncle Dick Dobbyn was one of the grandest people I have ever known. He was just a fantastic guy and a wonderful storyteller. Came from an Irish section of Boston, and he had that Irish ability to tell stories. And he was a classmate of Joe Kennedy at Boston Latin School.
Oh, wow. And
when the Depression came, Joe gave Uncle Dick a call because everybody's out of work. Nobody could find work. And he said, Dick, I'm going to set up a chain of theaters, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. I want you to manage them. So my Uncle Dick had a job right through the Depression. But he got a call from Joe Kennedy one time, and Joe said, my son, Jack, is going to make his first run in politics. I want to know, how much money should I spend? He can't lose the first time out. So my uncle said, Joe, nothing. You don't have to spend it. There isn't anybody in Boston who can beat Jack Kennedy. He said, great, I'm going to spend $1 million anyway. And he did, and he won. He became the representative, ran for the federal House of Representatives. And then my uncle was the federal, the financial manager for the campaign.
Wow.
And then for the campaign when he became senator, and then when he ran for the presidency. So my uncle would come to visit us up in New Hampshire where we had a cottage, and we would spend the weekend together, and he would tell me story after story after story. Oh my gosh, you could write 6 books with the stories that, so I chose him to be the older Lex Devlin character.
And so what you're telling me is that now that I've met you, I'm 2 degrees away from JFK?
Yeah, yeah. Possibly.
That's amazing. So I have a question. Why 2 lawyers and not 1? Do they play off of each other, or what was the thought behind that?
Yeah, exactly so. I wanted there to be a relationship that I could build on. I have a feeling, and Dawn, I bet you'll agree with this, that people who have read such and such a novel will get in touch, and so if they want to say something kind of frequently, say, boy, I can't wait to see those characters again. Not I can't wait to see what plot you're going to put together next, but I can't wait to see those characters in action again. And to give the characters 3 dimensions, and to give them a personality and a background, and kind of get more into the personality, the depth of the personality of these characters, I needed too. And I love putting a young man with an old man. When they first got together in Neon Dragon, Michael Knight was appointed he took on an appointment to represent the son of a black judge in Boston who was charged with murder in a murder that occurred in Chinatown. That was Neon Dragon. And he was a young kid, did not understand why he was accepting, why he was even asked to represent this young fellow. But anyway, when he got back to the law firm and for the first time met the terror of the defense bar, Boston bar, and that was Lex Devlin, terrified district attorneys, and terrified all of the lawyers in his firm. When he first met him, he was just overwhelmed with admiration for this man, just for the presence of this man. And this man was not terribly thrilled about being paired up with this young kid. By the end of the story, they form their own law firm together. And then when we get into the second novel, Face Up, by that time, there was a relationship that I could grow that really became much like my relationship with my Uncle Dick. It was very close to a father-son type of devotion, admiration, respect, that sort of thing.
That sounds terrific.
I remember one of the things, one line I remember was when Michael came back in the middle of Neon Dragon, he came back to the law firm, which was on the 7th floor of the building at 77 Franklin Street, where my law office was, the firm I worked for when I was in Boston. And he got off the elevator and passed by his secretary's office, and he said to his secretary, have you ever noticed that corridor that leads down to Lex Devlin's office, it's almost as if the ground rises as you reach that office. She had no idea what he was talking about, but I did.
So the latest novel in the series, High Stakes, involves as a theme an in-depth look at a real-life character which most readers will have heard of, Vlad Dracula. How did you arrive at that theme?
Oh boy. It's a funny thing how all of these started. I do enjoy, Dawn, as you know, I do enjoy not only presenting a mystery and having them solve a mystery and going through all of the elements that create a thriller, but I want 2 things. I want the reader to finish the book having enjoyed it, having been taken out of their lives and held in suspense until they read the last word. Good, that's one thing. But I also want, maybe it's being a teacher for 47 years, but I really want them to walk away with an in-depth knowledge of some bizarre subject that perhaps they never knew anything about before, but might find as interesting as I do. And it's funny how this one came about. In each of them, you mentioned what they were about, and each one has had a particularly bizarre, like frame-up, art theft, art forgery, that sort of thing, and so on. Fatal Odds was about the illicit trade in endangered wild animals. And in each case, there was a strange instance. I think God gave it to me, presented the subject that I could get so wrapped up in that I could do the research to write the novel. In this case, it came from a strange direction. For the past 7 years, between Christmas and New Year's, my family has gone down to a wonderful little place in Costa Rica. And we stay at the same, it's sort of a resort kind of place, but we've been doing it for 7 years. They've got a number of restaurants there. There is one sweet little waitress that we have met every year when we go down there. Anyway, this would be 2 years ago, just before I was starting to write, and I had no idea what I was going to write. Anyway, Jennifer came up to our table and she said at one point, you know, I've known you folks for years. You've been coming I know you're from the United States, but where in the United States are you from? And I said, we're from Pennsylvania. She said, good heavens, are you vampires? You get the connection. Transylvania, Pennsylvania.
Oh, so funny.
Anyway, so we laughed, but it stuck in my mind. Son of a gun, we got home, the first email that I got was from Viking Cruises. And it was advertising a cruise that started in the northeastern Europe and went south and wound up in Romania. And son of a gun, if you wanted to spend an extra 3 or 4 days, you could take a guided tour of Transylvania, including a guided tour of Dracula's castle. And I thought, gee, that's two bizarre references in 1 week. So anyway, I started looking into Dracula, not the vampire. You know, because I don't deal in that kind of thing. I admire those who do, but I don't write, horror or fantasy or anything like that. So the vampire didn't interest me. But Vlad Dracula was one of the most fascinating characters in all of history. Vlad Dracula, and we found this out when we went to visit. As a matter of fact, Lois and I stood over his tomb in a monastery that is devoted to his memory, as a saint, practically as a saint. And at the same time, this Vlad Dracula was known as Vlad the Impaler. And Vlad Dracula actually impaled everyone whom he thought was an enemy. There were no prisons, no jails in his region of Transylvania. He didn't need them. If anyone was even remotely suspected of being disloyal, he would impale them. Vlad the Impaler, he impaled at one point over 22,000 people. And those are his own people. That's not counting the enemies that he impaled. So here is one of the most sadistic, as a matter of fact, Vlad Dracula was the real historical character, was known as the inspiration, the model for the Marquis de Sade, from whom we get the word sadism, right? Now, how can you be the monumental sadist that he truly was and a saint at the same time? And that's when I looked into the history of it. And without going into detail, what he accomplished was, there was a time when the Sultan, the Turkish Sultan, Sultan Mehmed II, was on the march across Europe. He had conquered Constantinople and made it completely Muslim, enslaved or killed every Christian in Constantinople, changed it to Istanbul. His next route was through Venice and then sweeping all across Europe to eliminate Christianity. There was only one person, the Pope, called on all the leaders of the Christian countries at that time, please come to my aid. We need to gather together to thwart this threat. They all chipped in with very best wishes, very best thoughts, and nothing else. Vlad Dracula, with his little army of 10,000 men, fought the Sultan. And he was the one who turned the Sultan back, saving Christianity. Whence the admiration for this fellow. Now, that's half of the story. So he's a fascinating character. I think he's one of the most fascinating characters in all of history. From both good and bad aspects, he is also the most forgotten. Because at one point, when the book Dracula, when Bram Stoker, Bram, by the way, is short for Abraham. I didn't know that. But anyway, when Bram Stoker was traveled in Romania, and he did, investigated the situation, and he based his novel Dracula on the myth, the legend that had developed around Vlad Dracula. If I can I'll make this brief. But when Vlad Dracula would impale people, He had a method of doing it such that it left no scars on the body except one little hole here where the spike would come out. So when they'd be drained of blood, they didn't die from the impaling. He was able to do it by not touching any of the organ. When they died, he would take them up, throw them in the river. Now, here is a person, a dead person, no scars on him whatsoever, except for a hole here, and he's totally drained of blood. When he floats downstream and the natives down there pull him out, must be a vampire up there, right? So he developed this myth 200 years after his death, the myth that he was a vampire. That's when Bram Stoker used the myth to produce the novel Dracula. The novel Dracula has been made into movies over 200 times, into novels literally hundreds of times. So the vampire has totally blocked out all memory of the real, honest-to-goodness Vlad Dracula, who to me was infinitely more interesting. So anyway, put all that together and I thought, son of a gun, that'd be a good subject for the next novel.
And you also combined him with a totally unrelated theme of a Stradivarius violin. How did you come up to that combination?
You're right, Dawn. You're absolutely right. I usually like to combine two themes, two totally disjunctive themes, and then through history bring them together through the meanderings of Michael and Lex, bring the two together. The Stradivarius violin has always fascinated me, and for no reason I can particularly even remember, I started doing research on the Stradivarius. Why is the Stradivarius violin so much more renowned than any other violin? There was the Guarneri violin, there were a number of other, but the Stradivarius, you know, if you want to say the Cadillac of violin, it's the Stradivarius, right? And what I learned some interesting things about it, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I can combine those two themes, and son of a gun, they did fit together and they produced a novel. Incidentally, I'll tell you that one of the answers is, and anyone who has ever played a Stradivarius will tell you, that I can get more volume and a finer tone out of us. I can fill a hall with the volume of a Stradivarius violin playing it without amplification. Why? Why is it so different from others? And what the scientists have come up with is that in Brussels, where the spruce trees grew that Stradivari used to make his violins, there was a minor ice age at the time those trees were growing. And it has never happened before, will never happen again. But that ice age made that spruce different from all of the spruce that's been made in violins since. It just seemed like a fascinating thing to throw in.
So you have so many interesting themes for your books. Have you thought of a theme for your next novel, and is the writing of it in progress?
The writing of it is in progress, and actually, no, I haven't come up with the major theme. I've more or less just introduced the characters. I'm just working on the the initial chapters, and I'm just waiting for something to hit me to send me in one direction or another. He will. God will give it to me.
So what do you prefer writing better, novels or short stories?
Wow. That's like, which of your children do you like the best? Which child do you love the most? They're totally different, Don. They actually are totally different. I love a short story. I love short stories because they teach you to write punchily, write with punch. Every word has got to carry a load or throw it out, because you got to tell the whole story in what, 5,000-6,000 words. And I started with short stories. I love that medium. I'm still writing. There was one in last month's Alfred Hitchcock and also in Ellery Queen's, but so I still do it. But it has carried over. I'm so glad that I started with it, and I advise new writers frequently. When you're starting, start with a short story. For one thing, you can do it quickly. You do it in 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then you're going to be able to. You have something to send out. Then start on something else, and for one thing, it will get you into writing without the monumental task of trying to put together 90,000 words. But it will also teach you not to write boring books. In other words, don't waste words. Don't just, let the words flow as if they're paying me by the word to describe the weather and the color of the drapes and all of this stuff that bores us so with some books. It really teaches you to be punchy.
What is the process of getting, or what was the process of getting Neon Dragon in front of movie producers?
It's a funny thing. Neon Dragon came out. Yeah, it was during the time that when Neon Dragon first came out. No, it had been out for a couple of years, I guess. And the way it happened was this: in terms of my going after it, I didn't. I wouldn't have dreamed of it. I wouldn't have even asked that in a prayer. It was so far-fetched. But I came home from school one day, and Lois said, "Gee, Bob Gusson, the owner of Ocean View, Bob Gusson called you today, and he wants you to call him right back. I think he's either very mad or very happy about something or other." So believe me, I called him right back, and Bob was excited. And he said, "Jack, I'll tell you something." He said, a major producer, she was with New Line Productions. Eileen Mazel's her name, and Eileen was with New Line Productions for many years. And then she and 3 other producers with New Line split off and formed their own production company, Amber Entertainment, and 2 of them are in London, 2 of them are in Hollywood. Anyway, that aside, she wants to make your book into a novel. And she wants to have lunch with you. She'll fly in from London. We'll come up from Florida. Will you come up from Valley Forge? I said, I'm on my way. I'm walking already. And we did. We met. And it was one of those wonderful occasions where Bob and Pat got to the restaurant first, and then I followed. And so the 3 of us were there. And then Eileen, who always comes in about 10 minutes late, Eileen came in, and she said hello to Bob and Pat. She had met them before. And then Bob said, "Eileen, this is Jack Dobbyn." And Eileen just looked at me and she said, "You are my favorite author." There was only one thing I could do at that moment. I just grabbed her and I hugged her and I spun her around, and we've been the greatest friends ever since. And that was a case, by the way, when she fell in love with the characters. She fell in love with Michael Knight and Lex Devlin. And she said, I'm going to get those 2 on the screen. But a strange thing has happened since that time. Not so strange, actually, because Lois and I have noticed this change. Originally, the idea was to make a full-length motion picture, feature motion picture. It took time because she went through 3 screenplay writers before she could get a manuscript that she wanted to capture the feeling and the dialogue and so on from the novel. Went through 3 writers before she could get that, and then she got a director signed on. The son-in-law Paul McCartney, as a matter of fact, signed on as the director. And then she got this notion. She said, what I've noticed, more people are now watching series on television than are going to the movies. What would you think if we made your series into a television series instead of a movie? Because then I can do each one of the novels seriatim.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Wow, it was a wow. So
Yeah,
that's what's the process right now.
That's exciting. Well, I'm going to have to read the book so I know them. I don't like to ever watch anything. I like to read it first. So I'm going to have to read them all. You've given me a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
So everybody, I want you to go out and please purchase some of John Dobbyn's books. The newest is High Stakes, and he's working on, I guess, the 7th. And I want to thank you for spending so much time with me. It's been wonderful. And please, please stay safe.
Thank you, Dawn. You stay safe, too. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.